a second here, make sure it's going. Okay. All right. Hey, everybody. This is Douglas. Welcome to my Vodcast. I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm going to be doing this on a weekly basis. Hopefully every Wednesday is when I'll be posting these. If you hope you catched it last week, we were talking about lament with my uncle, Dr. Daniel Isgrig, and it was a really fun discussion. Had some good feedback about that. So I'm back to do another one. And today I have a really good old friend of mine. His name is Jack Bussert. We've been friends where I actually took a little bit and thought about it, but we've known each other since about 7th grade, I think, or 8th grade.
It was 7th grade. We both got recruited for the men's choir, and then there weren't enough people. And so then we just became part of the regular choir.
Yes, so we've known each other for quite a while, and as time has gone on, we've kind of come in and out of each other's lives with school and traveling, and then you guys now live in Indiana, and so it's been really cool. But I was able to be in your guys' wedding, and you guys are great friends of mine. So tell us a little about yourself, Jack.
Yeah. So I'm living in Bloomington, Indiana right now. I'm working towards a master's in music theory at Indiana University. I'm currently taking a year off at this time. I'm currently working as a Starbucks partner. Since we are in this quarantine right now, Starbucks has graciously offered to let me stay home since my wife has asthma, and so I'm able to stay here, keep myself safe, keep my wife safe, and really just do a lot of research and reading and catching up with friends. My areas of interest right now, I'm really focusing on the intersection of tuning and timbre and how that overlaps. So one of my other really big interests is trying to talk about bodies of music which aren't talked about as much in the literature. Found that organ music isn't well represented, harp music, carillon music, and also Christian worship music. I feel like it, and there are many reasons for its inclusion, many reasons against its inclusion. That's a whole complex conversation, but it's one that I think we should be having. So I'm very excited to be talking about music with you today, Douglas.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Jack, and I think you do have a very specific and good point of view for this topic, because I think that, based on both your music theory background, also your religious kind of the way you've walked through your religious faith and then where you've ended up. And I think that we have two different sides of a really interesting conversation that we can have about religious music together. So let's start by talking about the topic that we're going to be discussing. So tell us a little about your worship music journey that you've had in your life personally.
So my mother has had me be in the children's choir for as long as I can remember. So I've always grown up around religious music. I was a part of the handbell choir as well. That was I grew up Methodist, so lots of Methodist hymns. My mom loved Stephen Curtis Chapman. My dad loved Amy Grant, so there's a lot of that around the house. When I was in undergrad, I had the opportunity to take a job at an Episcopal church in South Tulsa. I became the keyboard player for their contemporary service, and I really got to get a deeper appreciation of what it takes to run a good contemporary worship service, the different merits of traditional versus contemporary music, and the goals that it can accomplish. I also got to work with the traditional choir there as well for a little while. And now up in Bloomington, I am attending an Episcopal church as well, but this one is a very high church tradition. We have an insanely high quality of performance from the organists and the choir, and we're able to do what's really considered in the Episcopal church some really serious rep on a really regular basis. And it's been great to kind of explore that area a lot more deeply, especially as I've gotten older and can appreciate the music more.
Yeah, that's cool. And for me personally, my journey is very different, obviously, as most of our journeys are. For me personally, my parents kind of, when they were younger, grew up independent Baptist, so very conservative, lots of hymns. And so a lot of the churches I grew up in were very hymn driven. There was a point somewhere in the early 2000s where suddenly, praise songs started coming out, Lord, I lift your name on high, and these types of songs. And so I started getting introduced to that. And then of course, Christian radio became a bigger thing during the early 2000s era. And so listened to a lot of Christian radio music, and that's really what I grew up on, was what Christian music was, CCM, contemporary Christian music, during the 2000s. And as time went on, I became interested in playing in worship bands. So I started playing bass guitar and played guitar and sang, and inevitably found myself with worship music more on the side of enjoying more charismatic type worship, in terms of like more thoughtful, Holy Spirit driven, lots of repeating verses and choruses, simple rhythms and tones. And that's really kind of where I sit today with a lot of my music tastes and worship stuff. So my journey has kind of been a gradual one through, getting more into praise music and into more modern worship to this day. So we're going to get into the why of why we're discussing this specifically, because I think that right now, why is it important for us to spend time exploring religious music during this time?
So right now, many of us are staying at home right now, or at the very least, we are all limiting our interactions with people. We're maybe expanding it online, but definitely our in-person interactions are definitely diminishing. So it's important that we continue to stay in contact with our faith, with God. And there are many dimensions to which you can do this. You can do it through studying religious texts. You can do it by listening to podcasts, or you can do it by listening to worship music. And since libraries aren't exactly a great option right now, I'm viewing this time as an opportunity to explore religious music, especially with like Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. There's never been a better time in history to want to sort of try to understand how religious music moves us and works within us, and also how it affects other people. There are some people who are diehard traditional music. They don't understand why contemporary worship exists. It's all repetitive in 3 chords. And I know a lot of people who enjoy contemporary worship music who don't understand why people continue to sing these dusty old hymns on out-of-tune pianos with words that don't really get a lot of usage nowadays. And it's all way too complex and takes them out of the moment. And I think this is a really great time for us to try to work on really radical empathy and understanding other people's religious experiences through the lens of music. So I really think this is a great chance for us to get to know ourselves, but also each other.
Yeah. And I think that what's cool about exploring and expanding yourself as a person in general is just part of what I think God wants us to do anyway. These moments I think that a lot of people are choosing right now to either suck into themselves, like pull just to this like tiny ball of fear or something like this. But I think that we should try to expand ourselves in this time. And I think that what we'll see is that we're given a great opportunity with this time to grow, to learn, to develop, to try to seek more things and to grow in knowledge. And so I think that this is why this is a good time to explore this religious music. And especially because a lot of the time in life, we're so busy, we don't feel like we have time to challenge ourselves spiritually. We rather go for comforts rather than say, how can I be better? How can I push forward? And I think that this is a great time to do that. So let's talk about where we start. I think that the first step when it comes to exploring religious music is find out what your niche is. What is your particular, what you're used to or what you're familiar with? What is your comfort food when it comes to worship? What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely right. The first step is to establish a baseline, and that is what resonates with me, what works with me. Just really, and the best part is this is the easiest thing to figure out because it's what you already have around. It's what you're already doing. What CDs do you have? What does Spotify say that you listen to the most? What hymns do you have dog-eared in your hymnal? What YouTube links do you practically have memorized from typing them in so much? It's very, very easy to sort of figure out what your interests are. And even if it seems kind of obvious to you, still take some time, write it down, like make it very explicit for yourself. Like, I like Chris Tomlin. I like Composer George Dyson. I like Hillsong United. Just write it down, make it very clear for yourself, just so even if you don't go any farther than that, it's good to just be able to say, just to communicate to other people, this is who I like.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when you have that starting point, you have a familiarity and you know what you can go further on. And so you and I were discussing this idea of these two different methods of starting there with that. What you like is breadth and depth. Can we talk about breadth for a minute? What do you mean by breadth?
Yeah. So by breadth, I mean that you're going to look for other kinds of songs and artists that are very similar to what you already like. This is kind of ideal for the person who's definitely struggling a lot during this time, emotionally, financially. If you aren't able to really put yourself in a lot of uncomfortable situations, you can still do some exploring. If you like Stephen Curtis Chapman, you'll probably also like Third Day. If you like Lauren Daigle, you'll probably like Tegan. I can't remember his last name at this time, unfortunately, but it's pretty much just, even if you're just listening to the radio, just jot down like, hey, that sounds good, that sounds familiar, that sounds like what I like. Just get that information down and just try to follow the thread from like what Spotify or Pandora suggests. Hey, this is kind of similar to this, maybe you'll like that. And really try to see how many different artists you can discover and how many new songs you can discover just by moving outwards from that one central point of you.
Yeah, and I think that what's good about that is that what we usually do, a lot of people are, what I would like to say in a very non-offensive way, radio listeners. You hit the highlights of people, or you just listen to what's on the radio, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. If that's what you like, if that's what you enjoy, that's totally fine and normal. But there's this element of what we're talking about is we're trying to expand ourselves and to explore more worship styles and different religious music. And so that takes a little bit of being uncomfortable. But if you're in a time where you are more uncomfortable and things are difficult for you and you're stressing out, way you can do that, like we're talking about, is take that radio list. KXOJ puts, all of their whoever's playing for that day on their website, and even take some of those artists and even go deeper. And the other way we talked about is going with depth. So take a band like Rin Collective, for instance. They just came out with a brand new album. They have a song on the radio right now that's really big. Take that song, go to find their album on YouTube. YouTube has a lot. Most bands put almost all their songs on YouTube nowadays, either in a live video, so you can get a lot of music that you didn't before. Listen to the whole album. Don't just listen to the one song. Take the full album, what they're trying to say through the album. And what I think you'll find more often is that you're going to get more value out of the music experience than just listening to one song by that artist, as well as looking into their older catalog. Rin Collective, I started listening to them a long time ago. So they have their very first worship album is called Organic Family Hymnal. And it's amazing, but nobody knows it because they got popular later. So it's good to go deeper into those artists that you like and to try to find their whole catalog, listen to an album, and even ask for suggestions from people who do like that band.
Especially with people who have had really long careers like Amy Grant and Stephen Curtis Chapman. In 1999, Stephen Curtis Chapman came out with his album Speechless. And many of my favorite songs from that album are B-sides, Fingerprints of God and songs like that. But additionally, he's still recording nowadays. And recently he's taking more of a bluegrass trend in his music. So one of the hit singles from that 1999 album, Dive, has been redone in his 2019 bluegrass album, Deeper Roots. And it is a surreal experience listening to them side by side. But I think that both versions have something to offer depending on what you're looking for at any given point in time. I feel like the 99 version is definitely more sort of meditative and calm, even though it still does have a lot of energy, plenty of guitar distortion. But the bluegrass version has a life and a spark to it that really, I feel like, facilitates the idea of, it gives a much more broad sense of motion. You know, like instead of a slow, large river, it's like you're cutting through rapids. And I definitely know that I alternate between feeling like one of those two versions is better for me. So it's always amazing to see what artists have done over time.
Yeah, definitely. And people with long careers, I mean, like Michael W. Smith is one of the best examples of this in Christian music because he's been making music since the 80s. So, and he's still rocking it out on the internet and just playing music. It blows my mind when I see that he comes out with new albums almost on a yearly basis. I don't even know how old he is, but it doesn't really matter. But that guy has been making music, and some people are just music makers, and they want to make it. And I think that the other side of this discussion too, when it comes to music, is that there's more to there's something about supporting artists that you care about, and this is not necessarily the topic of today, but this is also part of it. I think when it comes to depth, is that you really part of music is you got to support the people that you enjoy, that resonate with you, and the best way to do that is to get into their catalog and to listen to their old stuff. Get on Spotify, get on YouTube, buy the album. That's the best way to do it. But find ways to get involved with them and listen to them more, and that's how we can make better music in the Christian music scene and continue to let those bands grow and have a long career.
Absolutely. And you don't have to even like everything that they put out. I know that I recently went through the entire catalog of the band The Mountain Goats, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But there were definitely some albums that I absolutely adored and some albums that I couldn't stand, and some where I really had a mixed response. And that's okay. And it can be the same way for worship music. I mean, a lot of these people like Hillsong United, like there's a reason that their radio hits are their radio hits and why you haven't heard track 12 from their most recent album, because just sometimes they write better songs and sometimes they don't write as good of songs. But if you do find albums that you enjoy the majority of, you should absolutely consider purchasing the album from a dealer, like a physical copy, because that's the way the artist will get the most money, and that will support them the most and enable them to continue doing what they believe is a service for God and what is ultimately hopefully benefiting your religious experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think that no matter where you are, if you've never tried to expand your musical tastes or even your religious musical tastes at all, this is where I would suggest, I think Jack would agree, where you should start is by starting with going a little deeper on stuff that you already know that you like, getting deeper on artists you already care about, and trying to find out what else is out there. I think that we can all speak to the fact that music is an emotional experience that can really impact our spiritual faith. And that's true for a lot of people and for most people, I would say. And so if you haven't ever done this, this is where I would say you start. But we're going to go a little bit deeper here. We're going to go beyond kind of the general, like the starting point, I would say for most people, which is to just start like we just talked about. We're going to go into beyond the simple way of doing this. How can we go even further, go the next step? And so we were going to talk about, and I liked what Jack said at the beginning, he was talking about radical empathy. This idea that, empathy is the ability to get in someone else's shoes, to get behind their eyes and experience things the way they do. And when it comes to looking at worship music or religious music, sometimes if the genre is not your thing, if the style, if the production, if whatever is not your thing, it's hard to get those eyes lined up with them. But that's part of the experience of growing, is trying to see that empathy, and it takes time, and it's a difficult thing to do. Talk a little bit more about that, Jack, the empathy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, music is, as you were saying, it's such a personal experience, and I know a lot of people get very heated about the music that they like and the music they dislike. For us, like for me, for example, listening to David Crowder Band's music is a really powerful, moving experience. And it's one of those things where if I'm not careful, I will fall into the trap of saying like, if you don't like this, you are not worshiping correctly. You are not experiencing what I'm experiencing, therefore it's wrong. When in fact, that's really not a fair way to look at your brothers and sisters in Christ. The fact of the matter is that the reason all these different kinds of music exist is that someone does in fact have a religious experience with this music, and they are equal to us in God's eyes. And it's really important, I think. Christians have a very complicated relationship with other Christians and with non-Christians, and it's important for us to recognize that for something as subjective and as personal as music, that it is okay for people to find different ways to God. Like I feel like I'm not putting this as clearly as I would like, but it's this act of radical empathy can be something really difficult with something as subjective as music, because taste is something that's really hard to tease out, like what causes it, why are we like this, why is someone else different. But if you can learn to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and like if you're listening to the Bach Mass in B minor and say, like, what is it about this that, for example, my uncle really enjoys? Why does he find this religiously moving? And use that as a very active exercise. Do some research. Ask your uncle. Or if you're a contemporary person, talk to your cousin Joseph and be like, why do you enjoy listening to Social Club Misfits? It's the same 3 chords over and over. And really try to understand their perspective and try to get yourself into that same state of appreciation for that music that they experience every time.
Yeah, and that's good. And so I think one of the biggest, like you were saying, is that Christians have a complicated relationship with each other in terms of denomination. So one of the first ways and the big steps into looking at different worship music is looking at it from different traditions, between Catholic versus, Anglican or Episcopalian and Baptist and Charismatic Pentecostal movements. There's this, each one of them have their own kind of way of worshiping, in terms of what they think worship is, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like. And it's a good place to start, is just to kind of, watch a Catholic Mass, watch an Anglican church's service, and get involved in what they're doing and try to understand what the worship is from their point of view. Because my first time at an Anglican church, Episcopalian church, I was going through some religious issues and wanted to experience something differently. And so I met with Mary Ann Parish St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church here in Tulsa. Sorry, I had a brain fart there for a second. But went there and experienced worship with them, and I was so just interested and fascinated by the whole idea of the Eucharist and how everything centers around it and the way that they structure their services. And so it is difficult to do this, but it is something that I think is really important to try, is to see it through other people's eyes in terms of denomination as well.
Absolutely. And like if you look at the hymnals from these denominational traditions that have hymnals, there is overlap, some more than others. Methodists and Baptists definitely share a lot of hymns. Catholic and Baptist hymnals don't share quite as much, but there is still some overlap. But where there is overlap, they have different ways of treating the music and different traditions for how to handle it. The number of versions that I have found of Be Thou My Vision is alarming. It's just everyone has their own take on it. And on the one hand, that does mean that sometimes if I'm at a service that's using a different version than I'm comfortable with, I do get a bit distracted. But it's also a chance to experience another really beautiful way to sing these hymns and experience them. But it's also worth remembering, though, that some denominations don't have like a really traditional hymnal-driven tradition. So it's also worth exploring, I think, the contemporary worship versus traditional worship divide as well, if we're going to be talking about denominations. My wife grew up non-denominational, and almost one of the part and parcel things of growing up non-denominational is that you don't have that denominational tradition of hymns. Definitely they bring in they bring in Baptist hymns, they bring in charismatic hymns to elevate their service as to mix things up and break it up. But it's definitely not something that they have the same drive to do in the same way that like a Baptist church does that has a contemporary and a traditional service.
Yeah, definitely. Some churches, I grew up, with the Baptist hymnal in my hand, and as a kid, and drawing on the envelopes, the offering envelopes as a kid. That's what I grew up with, and I don't really remember a lot of those hymns, but I do remember a lot of the praise songs, and that were coming out as I was becoming a little bit older. And so I think that it is important to try to figure out and get in the shoes of these things. And sometimes it's almost impossible to get completely into that tradition, I think, in a real sense of the way, because I don't think I'll ever be able to understand completely what it's like to grow up in a liturgical church. But I can try to understand the meaning behind it. I never really understood what an Anglican church and a Catholic church and why they have communion or what they do the way they do. But after going there and talking to the pastor and discussing it, I finally kind of understood, and it brings so much more value. And now when I look at it, I'm not like, that's weird. Like, why would they do that? Now I understand. I can say, well, this is why they do this. This is why the Eucharist is so important to them. Even though it may not reflect directly into my worship experience, at least now I can understand that, and I can be a better person for it. And let's talk about music from beyond the contemporary traditional divide. I think you were going to talk about a word that I can't pronounce.
Absolutely. So something that has happened to me very recently is I went from a sort of contemporary driven Episcopal church, which then got a traditional musical service as well, to a church that has 100-year-old high church traditional music tradition, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so that's really gotten me plugged into, this sounds kind of oxymoronic, but the contemporary traditional music. There are still new pieces being published in this style every day. And there are lots of really great ways I can put dialoguing with the tradition. And something I wasn't aware of was the Episcopalian Evensong service. This is a service that, at least at our church, is held on Sunday evenings. It's kind of a conglomeration of Vespers, and I forget what the service is that comes after that in the daily offices, but it's sort of an opportunity to have a music-based service that centers around the same handful of texts. The Magnificat, which the text for that is taken from the New Testament. That's Mary's song of praise when she finds out she's carrying Jesus, and the Nunc Dimittis, which is the song of praise that Simeon says whenever he learns that the Messiah is going to be born. And in the Anglican tradition, at least, the composers from the UK and from the US who are in that tradition have really taken this opportunity to refine sort of the magnum, as the folks call it, to really refine these sets of songs in these services. And now there's this 100-year-old, 150-year-old tradition of these settings of these texts that are really gorgeous and beautiful. And I feel like it's the Episcopal Church's best kept secret. And it's something I never would have learned about if I had just stayed at my Methodist church. It's something I didn't even learn about when I went to another Episcopal church. But it's really beautiful music, and when you think about the text, it really offers something. But at the same time, the church that I'm at currently doesn't offer a contemporary service. And every now and again, I will hear some snide remarks from people about 4-chord worship songs. And it's, I wish that we had a way to sort of reach people who are more influenced by contemporary worship music. As I will continue to say, I think there's value in both of them. But if you're looking for a place to understand sort of traditional religious music that isn't 1750s German and isn't from a hymnal, then you should absolutely look into some Magnificats written in the last 150 years. And we'll have some resources that'll help you access those.
I'll play one right now for us, really briefly.
Yes, this is George Dyson's Magnificat in D. The Magnificat and the Nunc Dimittis are pretty much always paired together. And this one I had the opportunity to sing last year. Actually, I enjoy very much.
All right. Well, that worked out. I hope that came through okay. We'll have to find out once the recording's done. So
we can add it in post-production. It'll be fine.
Yes. So the other thing we wanted to talk about too was music from different styles. This is probably the one that I'm the most familiar with, and I think most people are, is that, with Christianity expanding beyond just certain types of people, it's expanded with different types of music. I'm sure you guys, a lot of people have heard of Lecrae as being one of the more common rap artists when it comes to the Christian side of things. And Lecrae is a great example of how music, when it comes to Christianity, can be relevant and not be bad. Um, there was a long time period where it seemed like Christian music and religious music wasn't current in terms of what pop culture would represent as being current. And so you have bands like, in the rap side, you have bands like Lecrae, Tadashi, KB, Tripoli, a bunch of these rap artists that have come through and represent God in a way that's completely unique to their culture, and they're growing up in things that they care about. And so a good way to start with this stuff is to try to find those bands that are more popular in the genre, like Lecrae, and say, okay, what's his catalog? What's his most popular songs? And then just sit there and try to understand it from their point of view. And do you like rap music, Jack?
I do love rap music. In fact, my continual refrain is I haven't listened to as much of it as I wish I had, but I say that about all music. So no, I do enjoy rap music. I really appreciate what that genre has allowed as far as poetic representation and explorations of rhythm. It's really a very fascinating genre, and I think it's worth just reiterating that a genre, the parameters for what constitutes a genre, it's not, for example, back when rock and roll was picking up, everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of conservative Christians were convinced that all rock music was evil and satanic. Even if it did have Christian lyrics, it was almost like some sort of like supernatural espionage of some kind. And it's worth remembering the genre is more about decisions made musically and lyrically at a structural level. And the message is ultimately whatever the artist and the band make of it. You know, because on the one hand, you have Black Sabbath, for example, who very much deals a lot with satanic imagery. And then you have like Skillet, who also like does a really a rock, they deal in the rock genre, but they do a Christian message. And that way, I feel like a lot of conservative Christians have baggage when it comes to rap music, but rap music is really whatever the artist makes of it. And in addition to overtly Christian rap, like with Lecrae and Tadashi, there are also many other rap artists who explore a wide diversity of topics, and it's a genre generally I think that should be explored more readily.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the times that when it comes to other types of music, we get a little bit afraid, or we have a lot of preconceived notions about what it means or what it is. And there's a lot of people out there in different genres that are Christians that are trying to set a new standard for what it means in terms of those barriers. And the Lecrae and a lot of the Christian artists are doing a really great job in the rap scene of really becoming not only relevant to the Christians, but also relevant to the world. And they've got a lot of flack for that too. Lecrae has gotten a lot of flack for that for the past couple of years, because he's been doing a lot more in the public scene. You know, he was nominated for a Grammy. There's lots of these things where people start saying, well, you know, is he really a Christian because he's doing these things? And the reality of it is that it's about the message, you know, and what he cares about. It's not always about what it looks like on the outside. And having representation in the mainstream is what we're here for in general as Christians. So it's good that they're being supported and that he's being recognized for that. Lauren Daigle recently had a similar situation happen where she was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and some people were really excited. Some people were really unhappy because of Ellen's particular, belief systems and certain things. And it makes you, you know, what really comes down to is, what is it really about? What are we really here for? And so part of this growth is growing beyond that's the empathy part, is trying to see it from their point of view. You know, what is Lauren Daigle trying to do being on that show? What is she trying to do when she sang at the NCAA championship, actually, as well? She sang the national anthem, which is pretty cool for her. But getting that recognition, what does that mean? What is her heart? And you can see that through her music as best as we can, and just believe and support those things, even though sometimes we don't completely understand it either. Especially like in the rock genre too, like you're saying, like rock had a really bad rap in the Christian world for a long time. You know, I personally really got into music because of rock, because of hard rock, screamo, heavy metal. These were the things that drove me towards music, was this genre of music, rock and roll and all this stuff. And it's actually pretty funny because, you know, Michelle and I will be talking a lot and discussing music, and, you know, she'll play a song from some classic rock band and be like, you don't know this? And I'm like, nope. Because when I grew up listening to Switchfoot and Pillar and Red and Disciple. That was my rock music. I didn't listen to Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and, you know, AC/DC. I didn't listen to that music. And so I came to that music in a much later time in my life, where Christian rock music was my thing. And I can tell you all about the scene from the mid 2000s to the early 2010s. I was so involved in that. But yeah, it's about trying to get the empathy of it. Switchfoot right now, Switchfoot's my favorite band of all time. I have two posters, one right here and one right here. They're one of my favorite bands.
What in particular does Switchfoot do that you enjoy so much? Is it something about like how they play the music, the sounds they do, the lyrics?
What I love about Switchfoot is the way that John Foreman, which is the lead of the band, what their music is all about, hope and positivity. And their music styles honestly go through this weird roller coaster. But I've never had an album by them that I really just didn't like. And they've written, I think it's over 10 albums. So I love the lyrical side. I love their passion, the way that their lyrics come through, because John Foreman is not, their music is not directly Christian in terms of worship. There's challenge in there. One of my favorite songs by them is called The Blues. And it's this basically the Christian blues song, as best as you can say it, is him describing how difficult things are and how he's not okay with it and he's not happy about it. And basically, but putting in a way of the Christian spin of, this is what it'll be like when the world caves in, a day like this. And it's just like that kind of concept. He's just really honest, and I love honesty in Christian music, because I don't think there's enough of that. There's not enough honesty, and so that's what I like about Switchfoot. It's just the authenticity, and also just the hope that always brings us back even when things are hard. So
Yeah, I always really appreciate Switchfoot because they were willing to. I'm reminded of this line from Sound or John M. Perkins Blues, love is the final fight. And something that I've always gotten the impression from listening to Switchfoot's music, whether it is overtly religious or not, but it's this belief that, you know, does need to be action. There does need to be some kind of upheaval and energy in life, in love, and ultimately love is the goal. And that's something I've always appreciated. Meant to Live, The Sound, Needle in a Haystack Life, um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Beautiful Letdown. It's all just about saying that love is radical and it is a revolution and it requires response and action to fill us and fill the world with life. And that's I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I've definitely always appreciated artists who are willing to sort of talk about the struggle and the darkness, to be sure.
Yeah. And I think that the cool thing about that concept of love that Switchfoot does so well is the fact that love doesn't just, it spans beyond Christianity. Like, as much as we want to talk to Christians about loving others, really that should be our general hope for all humanity, irrelevant of what belief system you have or what you represent. Like, love is for everyone, and everyone should be encouraged to do so, and everyone should be encouraged and have hope, irrelevant to whether or not they have Christ. But it is our ultimate goal, obviously, is to bring people to Christ and to show them that true love. But we should be promoting love in every way that we can, despite that. So,
Absolutely.
go ahead.
Absolutely. We could have a whole other podcast about that, about that rabbit hole, though.
Yes, we could. So let's go to talking about music from different times. So spanning, generational gaps as well is another way that we can grow with religious music.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Lauren Daigle earlier, and she's a really excellent example of a CCW artist who has created music that is really reaching out just to people in general, whether or not they are Christian. And another female religious artist who did that really well was Amy Grant. She was like, she's been recording since the late 70s, but I want to say in the 90s in particular, she was reaching everyone. Everyone was listening to her music, whether they were Christian or not. And that's, I feel like the things that Amy Grant and Lauren Daigle are saying, I feel like there's overlap there quite a bit. And even though there are stylistic differences, I think there are times when I enjoy the way that Amy Grant says it, even though it's in an older style. And there are times that I think Lauren Daigle is really able to take advantage of all the innovation that's been going on. And so it's one of those things where you shouldn't just limit yourself to the past 5 years, the past 10 years, because people have been saying this for a long time and they've been having similar impact. And it's worth seeing how far back can I go in time and still relate to the music.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the most intimidating parts of it is the fact that it is dated. And in terms of musical style, in terms of so many different sides of it, that I think that it makes it really intimidating for people who didn't grow up on it. And so, but yeah, Amy Grant's a great example. I think another great example of an older artist is Michael W. Smith, and how he's still making music to this day. And his music is still it sounds very Michael W. Smith. It's not his 80s, synthesized type of music, but it's still Michael W. Smith. And, there's lots of comparisons that you can make to him and listen to his older catalog. Of course, one of my favorite Michael W. Smith songs is Place in This World, because it hits me right in the emotions. And so it's good to go back and check out those old artists and do those comparisons. Find artists that fit into that. So if you're like a big Matt Redman fan or Chris Tomlin, Michael W. Smith is a very good example of that same type of music in terms of what kind of the general idea and the message of it, just from a different time period. So using that as a way to grow is really good too. And another way that we were going to discuss today was music from non-CCW genres. So talk a little bit about those kinds of music.
Yeah. And actually, this also gives us a chance to kind of overlap with older musics. Lots of people are concerned about religion and about Christianity, but they don't necessarily make that the focus of their musical output, even though they do bring it up. For example, Hank Williams Sr., he has many religious songs that are really gorgeous, but I wouldn't call him a CCW artist, and lots of other groups like Bob Dylan, for example. Bob Dylan has a lot of religious songs, but we all know him as a folk musician. Many of his songs do deal with religion, many of them don't. But just because he has that mix, like, we should still feel comfortable thinking of his religious music in a religious context. Back at Christ Church Episcopal in Tulsa, we to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we performed U2's Pride in the Name of Love, which one of the verses is about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And U2 has many songs that have to deal with religion and existence and larger meaning. And it's just this really great opportunity that we miss out on sometimes. And a lot of country artists, a lot of their B-sides will have hymns as well. One that's probably the person who takes it to the greatest extreme is the Mountain Goats. I mentioned them earlier. Their frontman, John Darnielle, is a Christian, and he is very interested in exploring Christian images and Christian ideas, but in ways that force you to reevaluate them or make you look at them again. He has an entire album, in fact. Let me see if I can find it in here very quickly. There it is. Yeah, so he has an entire album where the song titles are passages of scripture. It's called The Life of the World to Come. Like track 1 is 1 Samuel 15:23. Track 2 is Psalm 40, verse 2. And the lyrics aren't like, they will take from the scriptures, but they aren't telling the stories. They're setting it up as a foil to cause you to look at these stories in new ways. And in fact, if it's okay with you, Douglas, the third song on the track is Genesis 3:23, which in the Bible is when God is exiling Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And I think John explores this in a really fascinating way in this song.
House up in Clear Lake, where I used to live. Picked the lock on the front door and felt it give. Touch nothing, move nothing, stand still. Keep my ears open for cars. See how the people here live now. Hope that they're better at it than I was. I used to live here. I used to live here. I used to live here. I used to live here.
And what the song eventually goes on to reveal, because this song is about a guy who breaks into a home that he used to live in to kind of have this surreal, nostalgic experience of seeing like where he used to live and how people are living there now. And at the end of the song, he goes back to his own house and he talks about how he has to break into his own house. And it sort of gives you this sense that he is now lost because he is no longer in his old home. And that is a very similar narrative thread to what happens in Genesis when Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden. They are left homeless. They are left in a state of wandering. And that's a theme that is explored a lot in the Bible. And so I think that is, it really is like these artistic representations that aren't necessarily like direct worship experiences, or like Christian artists who are writing music that is religious but is just to be consumed, like Leland, for example. I know we talked about them. There are many songs that you would be hard pressed to like perform in a worship environment, but experiencing them as artistic songs discussing religious themes, it's really wonderful. And many of my favorite musical artists write Christian music that would be next to impossible for anyone short of megachurch would be able to put on.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's probably the most intimidating to think about looking at religious music that isn't Christian specifically. But there is a lot to be gained there in terms of, and I think that's where the empathy comes in the most, is in trying to find out people are exploring faith in all kinds of different ways. You know, there's lots of Christian artists that at one time were part of this Christian music scene and inevitably ended up moving on because of different things in their faith. And so there's this element of it that, you know, we're all on a journey together, and it's okay to look at things a little bit differently. And so, but I think another way to look at music is from different worldviews. You were going to give an example about you and your friend Mandy.
Yes, yes. So I have a coworker named Mandy. She is studying opera right now, and she is very interested in the CCW industry as an industry. And one of the things that she told me was that one of the things that the industry really hangs on to is this idea that one of the ways that CCW reaches people who aren't necessarily like immensely religious is that they try to have a positive message just whenever they can at all times, because people will listen to the music for the positivity. And something that Mandy was not satisfied with is she felt like in her worldview, she believes that the grace of God is so spectacular that we don't need to be reminded of our shortcomings or our fallen nature. You know, it's I feel like a lot of the narrative, for example, is like we are walked through the fall and then we are walked through our salvation in turn. And she feels like our worship should be like mostly about the salvation, because we have been saved and it's wonderful. And so she really feels like there's too much darkness in CCW. And it's entirely possible I'm misrepresenting her views. Sorry, Mandy, but hopefully this will still make a good point. I personally have the opposite view. I got really desensitized to CCW because I felt like it was only about happiness. I felt like it was only about positivity, and it was causing people to lose touch with what I consider to be a reality that is filled with struggle and conflict and pain. So the music that I have really tended to focus on and really look at is music that really emphasizes that this is a struggle and that it is a dynamic, and even some music that at times almost feels hopeless, you know, because I think that's, for me, that's so important for just staying in touch with reality and sort of walking through the human experience through this music. But that said, though, I think there's a lot of value in Mandy's perspective, and I think she makes a really great point. And the music that she's the one who turned me on to Lauren Daigle, and like Lauren Daigle is such an artist filled with hope, and she communicates that so well in her music. I find a lot of value in listening to her music. It's always a great time, you know, even though it's. And then I in turn recommended Crowder, for example, who is the man who literally wrote a song where he tells the devil, "You better run because I'm coming for you." That's on his second album from his Crowder project, American Prodigal. But it's there really is a wide diversity of religious belief that's expressed through Christian music. And would it be okay if I talked about Gungor at this point as well, Douglas?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you come from a traditional Protestant background, you're used to talking about the fallen state of man and his elevation through salvation in Jesus Christ. And I feel like that is really well exemplified in David Crowder Band's album, Give Us Rest, which is modeled after a Requiem Mass, but that's a whole other conversation. But it basically walks you through this state of the fall. The first disc explores like, oh, what have I done? I've messed up. Day of wrath, day of judgment, all these other things. And then disc 2 is the elevation up into paradise, into salvation. And it's a really gorgeous transition. And I always love listening to it. Recently, I've been introduced to Gungor, which is a really incredible and innovative band. And they really have, as they're very interested in deconstructing what it means to be Christian, to the point that I think many conservative commentators would say they aren't Christian anymore. But one of their fundamental beliefs, they have this radical sense of love. They believe that everyone will be saved. They believe that pain is a fundamental part of this world, and it's a beautiful part of existence, and it's just as valuable as joy. And their most recent album, One Wild Life, reflects that. And I personally, on the matter of universal salvation versus select salvation, I go back and forth. But no matter which side I'm on, whenever I hear the music of the other side, I always feel myself moved and inspired, and I feel myself growing by listening to it. And I really think that you should not be afraid of religious music that holds a stance that you would consider to be radically different, because many times you can extract valuable experiences and pieces of information from those differing pieces of art. And I really think that's beautiful and fantastic.
Yeah, I think Gungor is a great example of a band that sits on that progressive line that can be very challenging for people who grow up in a more conservative or even fundamentalist ideal. And when it comes to their music, Gungor wrote a song back when they were not nearly quite on the side that they are now, called Please Be My Strength. And it's one of my favorite Gungor songs. And he talks about the fact that it's very honest, and he talks about how he needs God's strength because he doesn't have it anymore. And I think that it's good to experience it not only is uplifting, but also relates to your situation directly. We're not all in a great spiritual high point all the time. We're just not. We're all struggling with different things and going through difficult circumstances. And especially right now, we're all going through difficult things. And so it's okay to have music that represents that difficult side of it. And I think that there's a balance there. I think that everything in life is a little bit of both, a little bit of extremes, somewhere in the middle. And try to lean into those things and find what works for you and what resonates with you. And you may find that you actually feel more fulfilled by trying to lean into that emotional intensity more than you may want to normally, because an artist is doing that for you and taking you down that path. And so I think that's what makes going to these different musics very encouraging and very good. And so, and just to wrap it up here, I really appreciate you coming on, Jack. It's been a lot of fun discussing this with you. So how can we expand our music styles more efficiently? What are your advice for that?
More efficiently? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we are living in like the ideal time to be trapped inside but want to explore music. Technology makes it to where so much music is available to us at this time through platforms like Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music. So definitely take advantage of these resources. Additionally, though, technology gives us social media and an opportunity to connect to individuals. Something that we need to be doing during this time of isolation is we need to make sure that we are physically isolated, but not emotionally isolated. We need to make sure we're still connecting with people and talking with people. And so something that we can do now is we can reach out to people that we went to high school with, or distant relatives, or we can even find, for example, like I could go to Church on the Move's website, for example, the non-denominational mega church that was near where I grew up. And I could get in touch with people there. We have the ability to reach out to people who in our normal day-to-day life we don't get to interact with. And this is a great chance to ask them, hey, what music are you enjoying? What music do you listen to? Why do you like it? Help me understand where you're coming from. And it gives you a chance to really connect with other people in a way that I really think we are meant to as Christians.
Yeah, definitely. Getting involved with other people sharing music is one of the most fun ways to interact with people, is to find common ground and to enjoy discussing music is one of my favorite ways. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed with a lot of my friendships is talking about the music that we like and engaging with each other. So ask people, what are they listening to right now? In the spirit of that, Jack and I both made Spotify playlists with some of our more expansive and music that we think that kind of goes over a little bit of these different levels we were talking about, ways to expand your musical and religious experiences. Um, I have a little bit of everything on there, a little bit of rap, some rock music, one song with screaming, but it's at the very end, so it's not a big deal. But you just some music to kind of expand that and to look at music a little bit differently, just to help you guys out. I'll put that in the notes below, and as well as my Facebook status when I make this video. And other than that, I think we're good to go. Thanks, Jack, for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And and thanks for being here and bringing such an interesting side of this topic.
Absolutely. I'm glad we could talk.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Maybe it's a little bit longer than normal, but they're going to vary depending on the guest and what we're talking about. I'm not going to worry about a time constraint too much. I'd appreciate it. And if you have any feedback for me, please let me know that, and subscribe to the channel and like it and comment, and let me know what's going on and how you enjoying what the content I'm making. And other than that, you guys have a good day, and we'll see you later.